Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us. We're here today to discuss an important panel topic, which is why KNX and AV are the perfect match. I'd like to present an experienced panel, who will discuss KNX for AV control, giving us an overview of the KNX AV integration process, providing hints for better integration. And I'd like to welcome today my panel, which includes Ian Gordon, Managing Director of GS Digital Limited. Ian, thank you very much for joining us.
Hi, Bob. Thank you.
And next to him, Mark Warburton, Director of Ivory Egg in the UK. Mark, thanks.
Thanks, Bob. Hi, everyone.
And Simon Buttle, who is Principal of Future Ready Homes Limited and also active in the CEDIA education. Thank you, Simon.
Thanks, Bob. Hi, everybody. Hi.
And Jeremy Aston, KNX trainer at BEMCO, as well as owner and principal consultant at Channel Smart Buildings Limited. These guys are the experienced professionals who are going to join us today. And we're going to be discussing, why should we use KNX for AV control? What's the benefit of KNX on home building automation as well? And if we can start with Ian, because he's an eager fellow, anxious to get into the discussion.
Absolutely, Bob. You know me very well. KNX, my roots are in electrical contracting. I chose, after many years of working with very many disparate systems, to look into KNX, EIB as it was 15, 16 years ago. And I've never looked back. KNX is reliable by the very nature of what it is. It's meant to be a simple communication system for buildings. And in the almost 2 decades that I've been working with it, it's proven that beyond every possible doubt. KNX is a solution that you can offer as a robust proposal. And as a contractor or installer, know that you're not going to end up putting stuff in you're going to be going back to endlessly, which I think adds a huge amount to most businesses. Back to you, Bob.
Thank you. I mean, again, this is the point of establishing, how valuable each part is to each other in a symbiotic relationship. Simon, I think, perhaps, from your point of view, there's a reason why these two should be good fellows together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think actually this is really about, KNX installers embracing the AV world. I've kind of taken the opposite journey to Ian, that I've been doing AV and, back in the day, and I've still got an LP12, everybody. So I still think the earth is flat. But, back in the day, we had all the analog and then it all mashed together and we got the digital. And actually now, for KNX installers, there's never been a better time for them to take full control of all of the extra low voltage systems in someone's house. I mean, pretty much everything that we deal with today is simply some kind of, digital information in disguise going over a data network. And certainly a lot of what we do now with audio and video is exactly that. So for KNX guys, it's a really perfect connection to bring the AV into their business and to start speccing that and getting that stuff installed in their clients' homes as well. And I'm sure, Mark and the others will talk about how you bring that actually physically onto the KNX platform as we go through the conversation.
Well, that leads a perfect segue to Mark.
Yeah, thanks. I think one of the things that's really interesting is AV used to be really a lot more intense, and you've got a lot of AV products that need a control system. What's happened over the last few years is there is a lot more simpler AV. It might be something like a Sonos system that's just a couple of speakers in different rooms of the home. That's probably the entry level of audiovisual and control via your phone. It goes all the way up from there to a fully fledged AV control system with TVs in every room, streaming, high definition or ultra high definition now, movies and sport and TV throughout the home with, maybe a home cinema with a very high level of fit out. The beauty is there's so many different levels that's accessible for everybody. You might just be a sound bar on the wall with a TV that Normally you wouldn't integrate, you just think, well, that's just part of the fit out of the home. But the beauty is now there's so many integration possibilities that, it's easy to say, well, we've got a KNX system in the home. Why don't we add a little bit of control so that we can do a whole house off and turn off everything in the home, including the AV, or have a button that starts your favorite radio station on Sonos, for example, on your keypad. So you've got this really easy level and really accessible level of control. But then there's still this need, and particularly in higher end homes and more commercial installations, where you've got a lot of AV that needs control. There might be a dedicated AV control system, but the beauty is they all talk with KNX, and that's where you might be integrating between the two. So there really is a scale, and what's great to see in the industry is there's so many different levels that you can come in and use KNX with lots of AV, KNX with a bit of AV, KNX with an AV control system. Yeah, there really is something for everybody.
And Jeremy, I know that you have experience in this as well. What is your thinking?
Well, I think it's basically been said by everybody else. I mean, for us, I've been doing KNX similar sort of time to Ian, and the reason I'm still doing it is the same reason Ian's still doing it. It works. It's a proven solution. It's scalable. It's flexible. It's robust. And we've been able to apply KNX in every application that we've ever come across. And AV has always been part of that. And we've used sometimes products that have KNX on board. Other times we've integrated via another control system. And I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about that later. But fundamentally, KNX has given us the opportunity to have an in or deliver a solution at every point, and AV is no different. So coming from the world of KNX going into AV is really open, and the same the other way around. If you're an integrator that's focused on AV custom installation, then there's an opportunity to move to KNX and still include the AV as part of that total control.
Well, we've established, by virtue of your experience that it works, but how complicated is it for people to actually make it work? I think this is a question that we should have the panel talk about. And who would like to start on that question? Is it complicated? Does it require special training? And we'll get to that part too. But if it does require special training, who should be doing it?
I think it's like anything these days, Bob. Training is the keystone for everything you offer. The level and complexity of the training varies hugely between products and systems. KNX, for instance, you do training to be able to use the programming tool. But in truth, you probably want to do product training with manufacturers so that you're familiar with how their products work. It's not necessary, but it gives you an edge and gives you knowledge which you may spend days trying to find out on your own with a product on a bench in front of you, depending on its complexity. With AV, certainly in my experience, AV is generally built up of multiple layers of system with one layer taking overall control. That means that you might want to go and do training on products that stream HD video. And then you do training on products that control the streaming of HD video along with the TV. So it tends to be a layered approach. And I think really it's like anything, you have to invest in training to stay at the forefront and the cutting edge of any industry these days. It's expected, anticipated, and largely provided. Just to add to that, over the last 12, 14 months, with all the negative effects of COVID and the pandemic, there's been a plethora of training given largely for free online, certainly with easy access to and incredibly good training. And if you care to watch any of it, you will see the difference between training that was being offered in March 2020 and what was being offered in August 2020. And fantastic opportunity for people to upskill. But yes, it's not complicated. You have to invest time. Time is based on the training you have to do, and knowledge is power.
Well, that's quite an astute observation about the COVID, Ian, and I'm glad that you brought it up, because I think that's actually a very significant point. Mark, I mean, you've been at it for some time, and you're also doing CEDIA education and that. How complicated do you think it is for people that have to get their heads around it for the first time?
Yeah, I think it depends on what level you want to go into the market. There's so much AV that's available at a more DIY kind of consumer level. And there are some great ways to integrate that. I said Sonos before, it's a really good example. There's lots of other solutions like that where it's easy to buy kind of off-the-shelf products that enable, the homeowner to have, more AV, really more audio video in their lives than they used to. And the level of control of that can be quite simple. Often that's happening from the KNX side. You are just, Sonos as an example, you've got the system, the speakers, and then you just point the, in your KNX, gateway that would control Sonos, you just direct it via the network to the Sonos system, and then you have some level of control. So that's really accessible, and it's a great place to start. I think if you're going to move up and you're going to start to offer a fully fledged AV system in someone's home with a control system, you've got to start to think about the user and the experience the user is going to get. I think one of the big changes, but differences between KNX and AV, KNX is fundamentally an electrical control system. It's controlling the infrastructure of the building. AV is much more about entertainment, and the requirements for that are quite different. And you've got to be able to say, what is the quality of the solution going to be like? What is the quality customers expecting for what they're willing to pay? And start to think beyond just these are the products. We have to think about what environment we're creating. As you start to look at more complicated AV systems, training becomes critical. It becomes really, really important. If you want to set up a home network streaming HD digital around the home, you need to know what you're doing and that it's going to work. I think particularly when we're getting into home cinema and home cinema design, that's a real experience, and it's easy to think you can just use products off the shelf, but really you need to be thinking about the acoustics of the room, the wall treatments, the position of the seating, the quality of the projector, the throw distances of the projector. The list goes on, and it starts to become a much bigger thing. So depending where you're looking to pitch, start at the bottom, start easy, but the second you start to get into more advanced systems and you're starting to looking to offer more of a designed AV solution, it's not complicated because what we do is complicated, right? We're all capable of handling very complex projects. That's the beauty of KNX. But I think with AV, it's about getting the training. It's about understanding what you're doing and doing your research, speaking to industry professionals, speaking to trade bodies. CEDIA is a great example of there's this huge range of training from CEDIA, from the really basics all the way up through to very advanced cinema design, as an example. So get the training, do the research, but also look for solutions where you can start. The first step of the ladder, it's a great place to start, and an easy way to get into the industry.
Simon?
Yeah, sorry, can I just sort of add to that?
Yeah,
and
sure.
Three sort of very pertinent points here. Number one, if you don't have data networking as a skill set in your business, irrespective of what you think your business is, go and get those guys on board. Go to the local college, find somebody with long hair who's skateboarding and take them back to your business. Because everything that we do is just noughts and ones in disguise. And whether it's Sonos or whether it's a security camera or whether it's an X1 or whatever that product is, it's just a computer in disguise. So you must understand that world. So that's the first and most important point. The second thing is that AV is actually all about content nowadays. What is the content? Where does it come from? And how do I get it from there onto the thing that I need it to be on? Is it Tidal? Is it Spotify? Is it Sky? Is it terrestrial TV? And, next week it's going to be something else. How do my kids get their TikTok or whatever it is they're loving this week? How do they get that signal into those speakers or onto that television? That's the success of the AV. And then the final point with this is that as a business, and we talk about this a lot at CEDIA, your success relies upon the product set that you build for your business. And imagine if we asked everybody here, we could all pull a massive box of technical junk that we've skipped after 6 weeks of trying to make that thing work, and it didn't, it worked with product A, but it didn't work with product B, and product C, well, it works at the weekend, but not during the week. Making that really robust product set for your business takes a long time, and it's not something you should do quickly or in a fickle way. But if you create that product set, you get a robust set of kit that works together all of the time. That's where the success will lie for the business. Going back to a point earlier, somebody said, you're not going backwards and forwards trying to fix stuff for your customers. And in that lies a bit of profit. And ultimately, that's what we're here for.
A bit of very good advice from Simon there. I think very significant. And I think I want to come back to this again with Jeremy, in the sense that you're actually involved in some brands and some particular AV products. Why don't you talk about that for a minute to explain, for example, if you're dealing with a brand like Crestron, how complicated is it?
Sure. I think this is really the kind of the practical implementation of what everyone else has been talking about. So we've had very good success with products like the Gira X1, which is a logic controller and mini server, basically, that will talk KNX, allow you to create really nice solutions for your client, deliver an app to them. But as part of that, it talks to Sonos natively. So you just set up some information in it about the Sonos network that you've got, and it will go off, see the players, make those accessible, allow you to recall and control Sonos things like playlists and so on. So it's very, very simple to have a completely separate Sonos network of devices, your KNX, tie them together with the X1, and get things like recall of audio at the same time as you're doing stuff with the lighting and the shading and everything else, and you create an experience. It's a scene that is not just a lighting scene; it's an experience and something that is affecting everything that the occupant is experiencing. So the lights, the comfort, the shading, as well as the audio. And that works really nicely. And that can work in reverse as well. If you're using something like Crestron or Control 4, they have gateways that will talk through to KNX. So if you've got an existing room or an existing home theater, for example, or just a media room that you're controlling with a single remote control, you can make that talk to KNX and reverse engineer that control, so that you can go, right, well, okay, when I press the TV on, I'm also going to do something with the shading and the lighting at the same time. And that's a really simple thing to do. It's really straightforward, and doesn't involve a lot of technical knowledge. And you're going to have the knowledge of the system that you're using, whether it's Crestron, Control 4, URC, RTI, whatever else. And that is also available now through products that have KNX built into them. So they're providing the audio and the video delivery, but they have KNX on board, so they don't even need to necessarily go through a gateway. But I would really want to emphasize the point that Simon made about the network, that everybody is moving towards pure network delivery. So, Crestron, they are bringing end of line to their analog systems, and they are moving to an IP based system as their de facto standard, even for a simple multi-room system. So it's really critical that side of your business is as strong as it possibly can be. The network is by far the weakest link in the chain at the moment in terms of knowledge and skills and people's ability to deploy those solutions. So get your network right, because it's going to be really, really important, and increasingly so in the delivery of not just data, but your audio and your video, because that is, as Simon said, that is just data now. That's everything that it's being delivered as. So that's a really, really important part of bridging that skills gap.
the weakest link in the chain is always the chain. So I think that fits. But it's also, I think, one of the reasons, in the press, we thought it was very good news when KNX announced IP Bliss with other standards, trying to make sure that people recognize that this is the way it's headed, and we should embrace it and go forward with that. So now, we've talked a bit about the integration, but when do you do this? When do you introduce AV to a KNX integration, and when do you introduce KNX to an AV integration? I'm going to start with Mark on this, because I think Mark has some particular opinions on it. Mark?
Yeah, it is as early as possible is the straight up simple answer. The sooner you're starting to think about the things you're going to use in your home in the design process, the better it's going to be. KNX is a fundamental part of the way that a building is wired and controlled. But it's not just the electrical fit out. It needs to start earlier, because if you start to think about the design of, say, KNX in the system at an architectural level, when you're really designing the building, you can start to take advantage of what it offers. So, if you're going to be, if you know that you're going to have shading control based on light level, we can increase the size of the glazing to get as much natural light, as much natural energy into the building as possible, because we know we've got the shading to control it. So, very simple example of where the electrical kind of fit out, or the way the services are operated in a building, could affect the design. And it's as true for AV. If you know that you're going to be, you want a home cinema, as simple as that, then having a dedicated space for a home cinema is a hell of a lot easier to design and manage than trying to fit it in to an area that wasn't really being used, or the bedroom that maybe we might turn into a cinema. I think it really is early. And I think it's the point of engaging with the integrator is what we've always pushed. The systems integrator, it could be AV, could be KNX, could be both, but that systems integrator is the one that brings all this together. And if they're involved at a design phase of the building, is with the architect, with the M&E consultant, with the interior design, with the client at the beginning, then we can achieve a much more intelligent building, really, across all the different services. That being said, I think there is a lot of scope for, particularly with AV, where as long as you put the right infrastructure in, as long as you've got a stable network, as long as you've got the right cabling in, it is possible to do things later in the project, particularly when we start to look at, factory-built homes, where we're starting to build homes that aren't built on site anymore. When we're starting to look at scaling up the amount of building that is required around the world, and a lot of countries, it really does need to improve. Designing the infrastructure, get that right, and then the AV can come later. As long as we've got the right cable runs in, as long as we've got the right ducting in, it is possible to do a certain amount of retrofit. But it depends what the final outcome you want is. If you want the home to be fully integrated and kind of custom built for the client, then you want to be at the very beginning of the project. If you're happy for it to be something that's retrofitted or added later, there's lots of ways to make it work. That is possible, but as early as possible is really the answer to that.
I'll open that up now to the other panelists, but also add: is it ever too late to add KNX into an integration?
Well, if I can pitch in, Bob, when should KNX be introduced in the process? So let's throw it on its head and say any time, because ultimately you want to, perhaps the way to look at it is you are trying to solve a problem, propose a solution. So Mark's absolutely right. And in my experience, 90% of my work is based exactly on that, a discussion with a client or a designer 6 months, a year ahead of the build. And all the preparations are made. The customer gets to choose if they want to have a cinema or not, whether it's dedicated or discrete or not at all, whether they have audio in all rooms, in the garden, and the conversation develops. So yes, in an ideal situation for you to have the best possible chance of giving the client everything, yes, in advance. But don't forget, there are solutions in order for you to be able to retrofit. And you should never look a gift horse, should you? It's business ultimately. If you want to make sales, you need to be able to adapt. We've done it on multiple occasions with radio, with traditional wired, and you can make it fit. It's absolutely one of the skills that might actually be what separates you from others, when other people will throw their hands up and say it's too complicated. There's a potential opportunity, and it certainly proved to be very profitable for us in the past on many, many occasions. So yeah, don't just think it has to be one route. Ultimately, this is about giving solutions, but making sales. And as Simon said earlier, hopefully there'll be a bit of profit in it. Turning work away is a surefire way not to make profit, I think.
Yeah,
we don't want to be horses orthodontists, do we? And
I'm just going to add to that, Bob's.
Sure, jump in, Jeremy.
One of the key things to remember with KNX is the various transport mechanisms that it works on. So you obviously have the KNX wired bus. You also have KNX RF as well. So there's a great opportunity to be able to go and put KNX in a retrofit situation, or where you need to extend something and don't have the infrastructure in place. And so to do a kind of room level solution, for example, and grow that is a real opportunity. And so KNX can be used in all of those different applications. And on a small project, it could be one room, right up to huge multi-level, large-scale buildings.
Simon?
Just to sort of finish off, I think, this section, if you look at the Riba plan of work, there's a very clear point, or two very clear points, where we should be getting involved. And this is really, again, about business owners understanding the Riba plan of work. There's the concept design, which is the third stage along in that. And that's where the sort of, slightly jelly-like form of the project begins to solidify and take proper shape. And then another two phases along, there's the technical design phase. And whilst we talk about the KNX bus, that's of course fundamental to the world, but actually the thing that's fundamental to a KNX job in the property is the M&E design. And that M&E design is done at that technical design stage. And we need to be discussing KNX at that point in the project. So this is well before bricks and mortar are laid down on the ground. If we're discussing it then we can embed KNX into the very design from that stage. And in order to do that, you need to understand the M&E specification, and then out of the back of that, the data network just falls off the back of that, as does, the speakers and the cinema and the security system and the fire alarm or the smoke alarm, etc., etc. All of those services can be dealt with at that point in time. So I think that's important that, businesses and business owners sort of understand that Riba workflow and understand where they can put their sort of slab of value onto that table.
Thank you, Simon. And Jeremy, do you have anything to add? I mean, obviously, that sounds like great advice to me so far.
Yeah, absolutely. The earlier the better. But as Ian said, the opportunity is always there, and the technology supports that at whatever stage of the project that you're looking at.
Okay, so I think now, guys, what I'd like to do, if I might, is I'd like to hear about some of your horror stories.
No.
I'd like to hear some of the examples of things where things went wrong. What did clients or installers do? Tell me some stories.
Where to start? I'd love to say it's all beautiful fairy tales everywhere, Bob. But that's certainly in my experience. That's not the case. There are problems in every, or possible in every delivery of every project that ever goes on, let alone in the KNX and AV world. In my experience, and to keep it simple, horror stories are generally down to a poor understanding between two parties, in my experience. So poor documentation is probably the biggest part of that. When you look at a project and propose a project, how you write that down on a piece of paper or in an email, or in ones and zeros, as Simon says, is really important. And transferring that proposal in a way that your customer will fully understand is probably the most critical part, in my experience, of what you're offering. Poor understanding at a later stage leads to problems, accusations, all kinds of potential risks for you, your business, and for your customer. So in my experience, the most common issue and horror story is a lack of documentation on site on a project that you might visit. And ultimately that comes down to a lack of documentation when the project was enacted. So, you know, that is probably the biggest part of anything that we ever have to deal with.
Jeremy, what about your horror stories?
I would say that the biggest, you know, Ian's hitting the nail on the head in terms of communication and documentation. But I think in terms of the technical side, it's actually got a lot better, because some of the things we've tried to do in the past, and some of the things I've seen when I've gone into other projects, is basically the system being far too technical and not really being deployed and implemented in a robust and reliable way, and maybe trying to do too much. That situation has got a lot better in terms of what the products can do, the product's reliability and robustness themselves, and also because there's been a simplification in what's needed to be done. And Mark hinted at that earlier when he talked about, you know, things like now basically a lot of people are just streaming things through something like Sonos or similar. So what you're trying to control is much more, there's less of it, and it's easier to control in many ways. So I think some of the technical challenges that perhaps have overwhelmed people on projects previously, that has got a lot easier and a lot better, and that's less of a situation. But definitely it still applies that when trying to design a solution, and particularly if you are looking at a solution which KNX allows you to do, which is to embrace everything in a property. So the mechanical, the electrical, going through the climate control, the shading, going through the lighting, into the AV, into other areas like security, access control, etc. What you can end up with is where you technically might be able to do an awful lot, but just because you can doesn't mean you should. And this is something that we've learned, that, you know, sometimes the hard way, that actually less is more in some things, and giving people simple control but reliable control of the things that actually make the most difference to them it gives them the most bang for buck, rather than giving them something that is trying to be all singing and all dancing and doesn't deliver anywhere really well.
I think people appreciate those simple experiences.
Definitely.
Simon, anything to add?
Well, yeah, I just really want to sort of emphasize what Jeremy said, which is that actually we're all engineers, and we can be absolutely guilty of over engineering stuff. And, you know, one of the sort of lessons I've learned over the years is actually just to spin my systems around on their head and say, and look at it from the client's perspective. Is this simple to use? Is it intuitive to use? You know, can anybody use it? Can grandma come to the house and use that system? Because that's where we fail. We are too clever, or try to think we're too clever, and over engineer stuff. And it's absolutely that for me, that, you know, the simple solution is, you know, nearly always the best solution.
Mark, I've saved this for you to be the anchor on this question.
Yeah, I think kind of summing up, kind of bringing together a bit of what everybody said, something that I've seen done really badly is that over engineering. But the impact of that is trying to have, maybe the AV control system's got its own touch screens and its own display. and you've got the KNX system, which is controlling everything in the home. And it's really easy to go, okay, let's control everything from the AV touchscreen. Let's control everything in the home. And you end up adding too many pages, too many buttons, too much going on, exactly as Simon said. And it becomes not unusable, but it becomes very difficult to navigate to what you want to do. I think you've got to be really careful to kind of recognize what a user, what the customer is trying to do at a certain point in time. If they only ever use that touchscreen to turn on the lights and play the radio because it's the kitchen, just give them that control. They don't need to be able to control the whole home. Separating off the different parts of the building into different layers. So the wall screens are really simple, really easy to use. If they want to do the more in-depth controlling the home, changing scenes, setting up timers, you do that at a different layer. It goes both ways though. You can have a keypad that on the KNX system that is trying to do a lot on the AV side, and it really all you need to be able to do is turn the room on and turn the room off. And I think those are some examples of where the engineering can really get in the way of the solution. Just because, exactly like Jeremy said, just because we can link everything together doesn't mean we should. And often the requirements of the AV control and the AV visualization are very different to the building control on say the KNX side, because AV wants to be fun and entertaining, and you use it all the time, and it's fast, and it's quite graphical. Whereas KNX wants to be simple and easy and reliable. And sometimes those are competing, and it's making sure that you aren't trying to make one size fits all really, and use the right product, the right application, link them together when it makes sense, but really don't over-engineer it, and try to make it as simple as possible for the user, because that's the people. As much as we might think it's technically the best system, or it's really easy to use because you push this button, then go to this page and do this, and then you do this and do that, it works. It's the user that lives with it. It's the customers that have these systems in their home. We've got to put them first, not the engineering.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for sharing all your experience and with us today. Why is KNX and AV a perfect match? Well, I think we all agree with Simon when Simon says profit, for integrators and installers. But I think also what you've described here is the experience, that it's also profitable in terms of experience for the consumer, for the end user, for the homeowner, for the building owner. And I think that in the end is what is our guiding light on making KV and AV a perfect match. Thank you, everybody, for your contribution today.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.